These are the fun reviews. People shared their thoughts, and Douk listened to the community. And the best part is, we get to see a product evolution with a couple upgrades that make this one a lot more interesting for a lot of people. And to be honest, a lot more functional. This is the original Douk H7. It's a good looking little Class D desktop size amp. Has all the things we like on these: multiple inputs, XLR and RCA, good power with the 3255 chip, RCA outputs for sub, a VU meter, but it has 2 volume knobs. That right there threw a lot of people off on this one. Sure, dual knobs can have their selling points, things like balancing the sound for hearing impaired, or possibly you're in a difficult location. You could use these to dial in the center imaging, but the question always remained, why not just include a balance knob instead? And guess what? They listened. This is the new Douk H7 Pro. Highlighting the key similarities and differences on this one. First of all, they kept it good. The case design on this one is one of my favorites with these small desktop size amps. It has a really nice shape to it rather than a boring little box. Actually, get some curves on this one, which is nice to see. The dials are still the same, high quality, good feel with a nice knurled texture to them. The rear is exactly the same, 2 input options, RCA and XLR, switchable in the front. Then an RCA output for something like a powered sub, and then simply the speaker terminals. Getting into what's new or what makes this one the Pro, for one, the addition of a balance knob. It really simplifies the use case with this one. A lot of people were honestly a bit confused with the dual controls on the original unit. The knob does have a center detent as well, so that's a nice touch here too. We also actually get 2 VU meters on this one. I always liked the original meter on the first H7, but a number of people have commented that it's a stereo amp. Why not a meter for each channel? Well, here you go. Now you get 2, and they pulled this off by moving the knob for sensitivity for the meters to the bottom of the unit rather than the front on the original. And that just clears up more space in the front for this one. Also take note of the adjustments on the bottom. It's an adjustment for each channel, and you'll likely need to fine tune these a bit to get the needle response that you're looking for. Like I mentioned earlier, the case on these is one of my favorite designs. It's the same case, but I did notice that they tweaked the color just a little bit. It's more of a black gray tone rather than a bluish gray that was on the original. I'm good with either here. Both look pretty good on that front. The input switching slightly changes. We do lose that nice knurled selection knob the H7 had, and instead move to a toggle for switching between the inputs and powering on and off the unit. It's just one of the compromises needed to make the additional VU meter fit. And I would say I'm good with it. I'll take the additional VU meter over the dial in this case. Basically, the H7 Pro takes a lot of the guesswork out of this one and keeps all the good stuff, as well as adding a few things that might draw some people in. A number of people had questions how to use the original. I myself just set the volume to full and controlled it from a DAC preamp or a Weem streamer, avoiding the dual dials altogether. But I think the move to a single control was the right move, and we get a balance knob, which is rarely included on these amps. All the benefits of fine-tuning the sound to your space without the need to break out a dB meter just to adjust the volume. Win-win, I'd say. Internally, this one's going to be very similar to the original. I took apart both to see if there was any obvious differences in the design. In the specs, they have a total harmonic distortion improvement, as well as a signal-to-noise ratio improvement. So I was hoping it wasn't going to be cloned internals. And there was some updates here. The first thing that jumped out to me was the larger capacitors being used, so that's a good addition to see. Basically, looks like the same board layout with some new components. No swappable op amps on this one. Everything is soldered in if you're interested in that sort of thing. I actually have some new Burson V7 op amps that I was thinking about swapping in here for testing, but it looks like I'm going to have to find another home for these. Taking these apart is really simple. Just take note the VU meter connections are glued at the connectors, so just take a little bit of caution disconnecting those if you open this up. Generally, you really only need to open these up if you're into op amp swapping, so in this case, you can likely just leave it together. I just wanted to highlight and show everyone the board design to see if anything stood out. Inside we have the same TI3255, which isn't a problem for myself. This one comes with the same 32 volt 5 amp power supply, which is actually one of the areas I think they could have pushed this for the Pro model. A 48 volt power supply would have been appreciated to bump up the capabilities of the 3255 that we know it's capable of. Nonetheless, you are welcome to push this with a 48 volt power supply of your choosing. Just make sure to do your due diligence, as many of the off-brand adapters don't produce what they advertise. My advice would be to try it in its stock configuration, the 32 volt 5 amp. It's in all reality likely enough power, and if by chance you need more, just grab one of the mini 48 volt power supplies that are available today. The pre-outs are volume controlled as well, so fear not in this area if you plan to hook this up to a sub. It's actually wild the amount of amps that advertise sub outs. but it's not even a volume controlled output. It's been getting better though, with a lot of the new amps released in this last year. They've been pretty good on that front. I prefer the RCA pre-outs like we have here in comparison to some of the 3.5 millimeter outputs that we often see. The RCAs won't have any internal filtering for the sub, so just keep that in mind and adjust these from the sub itself. Really shouldn't be an issue. Not many of these amps have multiple inputs, this one having both XLR and RCA. The vast majority just offering RCA, so in my mind, this actually puts this one a step above a lot of the amps, especially if you're a multi-input user. You could easily bring in a streamer over XLR, and then a turntable into the RCA input. It's not the only desktop amp offering this, but it's one of the more budget-friendly ones that do. As for the sound review, it's going to sound like a lot of the other 3255 amps that are well designed. I generally gravitate to speakers with a little more warmth to pair with these amps to somewhat get around some of the tendencies to accentuate the high frequencies above a 4 ohm load. The frequency response will vary depending on the load connected to it. So depending on the speaker, you may end up with a slightly different sound. And that's always something that you should keep in mind when people are reviewing these, the type of speakers that they're actually using when they describe the sound. It's honestly not much of a concern though for myself. The impact is very minor, and I personally think it has a really good sound. No obvious weaknesses in the sound profile for the bass, mids, or treble, and the imaging is actually really good in my placement. The included power supply won't push this amp to its max potential, but in an office space like I used for most of my testing, it far exceeded the needs in a room of this size. I really had no need for additional headroom with the speaker pairings I used for testing. Speaking of pairings, I used a few for this test. The Emotiva B1 Plus, which does a pretty good job with these. The tweeter on these speakers comes across a bit hot on some amps though. I think it's a good speaker at its price, but it walks the line of being a bit bright. But that's more of a speaker design than the amp itself. So I actually found a more suitable pairing with the CSS Tories that I built. It's a DIY speaker kit that CSS sells. It had a really nice full sound with plenty of detail. There's a 3-part build series on that one if you're interested in DIY as well as an additional series on the way from their flagship DIY model. Part 1 should be posted in the coming weeks. On the original H7 review, I tested it with my trusty Polk LSIM 703 bookshelves, so I figured I'd see if there was any difference. I really didn't notice any difference here, other than that I only had to use one knob to control the volume. This speaker pairs up really well. It's a demanding speaker as far as wattage requirements, but this amp was able to get it done really without any compromise. One simple way to think about this, the biggest bang for your buck in changing performance, comes with the speaker. Get a good little amp like this H7 Pro and pair it up with a speaker that fits your needs or your specific sound characteristics you like. If it's a good amp, it's not going to be the piece of gear that makes the most impact in your listening. Ideally, it should be transparent and true to the source like this one is. So if you're shopping for an amp, this one's cheap, it has multiple inputs, enough power for most speakers, and well, VU meters, so it should fit the bill for a lot of buyers looking to get something without breaking the bank. My final point with this one is, it's a really good looking little desktop amp, interesting casework, and some details that make it just plain fun. Pair this one up with any of the Weem products, take advantage of their software, and really you're at a good starting point to build a fine little system. Bedroom, office, garage, even your primary system. Just don't overlook these amps if you haven't gave one a shot yet. I have plenty of other premium gear, but I still really enjoy these little amps too. If you made it this far, you're a real one, and I appreciate the watch today. Please like the video and consider subscribing for a lot of great content on the way. Just to give a quick rundown on some of the upcoming reviews I'll feature, we have Arundel, CSS, the DIY speaker that I mentioned, the new Buchart A10s, which are crazy good, and around 5 other boxes that I haven't even got into yet. Take care, we'll talk soon, see ya.